that Grimoire Encyclopaedia has been, it is my magnum. It's a labour of love. It took me 3 years of working every day. Worked through COVID lockdowns, where I was actually at work when I was in bed with COVID, flat burning down, and all sorts of other fun things. By the way, that thing of the Sephiroth seal, where it says if you own this book, you know, your house won't burn down, doesn't work. Unless you have to maybe have the Hebrew edition and not an English translation.
Or the manuscript.
Yeah, obviously you need the manuscript. It's just having the book doesn't work. The tragedy of that was I did most of my library got trashed because that was where the fire started. The fireman looked at me very funny when I went in and said, "Can I take a few things?" And the things I took was the flash drive which had the book on, my passport, and the laptop. I'm planning on leaving the country though. No, but my current laptop was melted on the desk, so I had to use an old laptop. But I still needed something when I was going to be staying in a hotel until I got a new place to live, so that I could carry on working on the book. Because the book became an obsession. That's these things doing it every day, working on it. My beloved wife Rosa had to put up with me talking in my sleep about the book, waking up in the middle of the night because my unconscious had been working on edits, and I'd wake up with the edits for the previous chapter I'd been doing the day before, and I'd then have to rush to the computer and make the edits that had gone on. So even when I was asleep, my brain was working on the book. It did become this sort of obsessive labour of love. You know, I've been sort of working with the Grimoires for over 40 years now. I mean, my first conjuration I did 41 years ago. I look back at it now and I cringe and think, my God, I was completely unprepared and had that sort of innocence and ignorance that a teenager has. Fortunately, it worked very successfully, and as the things that I asked for have all come to fruition in my life. So it was a crazy thing to do at the time, but it worked for me. So I'm very glad about that. And the first books on magic I bought, some of them were Grimoires. When I was 14 and started seriously practicing, maybe guided by something, or a spirit, the first 6 books I ordered from Occult, which isn't around anymore. Back then, end of the 70s, Occult was one of the places, one of the suppliers in this country to get stuff. If you're outside of London, where you had like Watkins, Atlantis, Counterculture used to have in Camden, and Foyles used to have a really good occult section, stashed away up on the top floor. You had to go all the way up. That stuff, you've got to go up to the 3rd floor for that. But Occultique was was bookshop and supplier. And so I ordered 6 books, my first order, which was The Key of Solomon, Sacred Magic of Abra-Melin the Mage, Grimoire of Armadale, so 3 Mathers books, I'll come back to that later, Crowley's Magic, Levi's Transcendental Magic, and Francis King and Stephen Skinner's Techniques for High Magic, which I then devoured and started like everyday pentagram ritual, hexagram ritual, middle pillar, ritual of the Rose Cross, and doing all these things, a couple of hours every day, you know, really into it. That's it. I took the vow that's in that book, again, thank you, Stephen, dedicated my life to magic, and sort of things went from there. When I was 18, I was very fortunate that I got accepted into a magical lodge, and their practice was focused on grimoires. So I got to see people who really knew their stuff doing it. The guy who was the master of the temple, lucky sod, had an eidetic memory. So he only had to read a conjuration once and it was in there. He could just let it. So first time I was there and actually saw a tangible spirit thing, it was a complete game changer. Once you have that validity of spirits being external and not just being a part of your unconscious, as Crowley and some others have unfortunately claimed mistakenly, it just changes your perception of the universe and how you interact with the world around you. And from there, it's always kind of been there's an underlying theme. I got involved with other things with like Telema and Wicca, but with the grimoires in the background more. And then back in 2003, met Stephen in person. Within 5 minutes of meeting, we had decided to write together and form Golden Horde Press. And between us and Joe Peterson, who was also doing amazing work, Joseph Peterson's books. If you're into grimoires, you have to have all of Joseph Peterson's books. He's just fabulous. He's a fantastic scholar. and his website, esotericarchives.com, is an amazing resource. The three of us, as the late lamented Jake Stratton-Kent put it, sort of ignited the fires of the Grimoire revolution. The work we put out, I think, then really opened the field out. The last 20 years, there's been so many good books, people finding new translations, people going looking for stuff. You've got people like Dan Harms, Al Cummings, Frater Asher, Ashton Chastners, lots of people, practitioners doing it, and also really good academic works coming out, like the Penn State Magic and History series, people like Claire Fanger, Richard Kuiper, Robert Matheson. All, you've got from the dry end of we're just going to write about the material, to the practitioner end of, we're going to write about the material, but we're actually going to do the material as well. And it's just really opened out. It's like magic in the last 40 years has changed a lot. The internet has changed things as well. With the technology, there's a lot more access to the material, to manuscripts, where people like Stephen and myself had to go and spend days and months in libraries looking at manuscripts, paying for copies of them, paying for them to be photocopied, or having them photographed, which could cost thousands. Back then it was not cheap. So now you can just go online and see digital copies of a lot of manuscripts from all around the place, which is fabulous. It's just opened out so much. And that expansion made me feel I needed to do something about it. This kind of started back in 2010. A friend of mine in Oxford, Mog Morgan, does Mandrake of Oxford, who might have seen his books, sent me an email and said, Dave, because he always calls me Dave, he's one of the few people I tolerate calling me Dave, because he's known me since the 80s. And I don't like being called Dave, I'm David. But for Mog, I'll tolerate it, because we're old friends, and we've sort of done a lot of stuff together in the sort of magic world. So it's like, Dave, you're into all this grimoire stuff. I don't really get it. Can you, send me a few paragraphs on, the main grimoires, so I can, explaining it to me. So I wrote him this email, which ended up being 30 paragraphs on what I considered the main grimoires. And it's like, there you go, Mog. He sent me this one-word thing back of, thanks. You asked. Be careful what you ask for, because it applies to dealing with magicians as well, with spirits. So the seed was kind of planted there. I was seeing more and more material coming out, producing more material myself, translating stuff, looking into doing the research, in some cases doing the practice, because you can't practice everything. You have to be selective to find what works for you, what you want to do. But there's just so much there, and for people who are coming in to practicing grimoires, even if they're experienced and they're coming from other traditions, it's still quite overwhelming. There's a huge amount of stuff there. Somebody should try and put all this together. Okay, nudge, nudge, from certain spirits I work with. Okay, that somebody is going to be me. So then I started work on the Grimoire Encyclopaedia. So I started to got about 10 grimoires in. Had an interesting experience where I was having a lucid dream, and this is something that was quite new to me, and I've not really come across it happening. So I'm in my dream. So I'm in the dream, and I'm lucid. So obviously I'm aware of what's going on. And then suddenly my patron deity Anubis possesses me. Well, so 1 minute I'm lucid dreaming, the next minute my consciousness is off in the void. Well, I wasn't looking around because there wasn't anything to look around, because I was just spirit was in the void. And I thought, okay. Then I came back in, and then I'm back in my dream, and there's all this stuff in my head of all this other stuff that has to go in the book. I'm like, okay, I've just been told directly that this all good. So I had to go back, and we go back through all of those 10 chapters I'd already done. It's like, okay, so now I've got to do, as well as having this spirit list and things, I've got to do appendixes on this and that and this and that. And fortunately, he did that only 10 in, not 50 in. That could have been really bad, because there's 100 sub-chapters on individual books. I stopped at 100. I could have done more. I've got about 20 more chapters already planned that I think should go in there. a few more of the Arabic grimoires and some other more obscure ones. Because I found grimoires I'd never encountered. In all my years, in all my research, there's stuff I'm like, oh, this is good. I've never seen this before. Oh, and this connects this to this, and this is interesting. So, yeah, it just sort of kind of evolved as it went along and became bigger and bigger. But I decided 100's a good cut-off point. I'm going to have 100 chapters. About 90 are grimoires, and the other 10 are important books to the grimoire tradition, either things that sort of are sort of the books that precede, like the Greek magical papyri, or things that catalogue, like the Antipalus Maleficorum of Trithemius, which is important in that it's showing all of the sort of texts and things that are around at the time. So the 100. 100's a nice round number, and that was where I stopped. And doing that gave me quite a different perspective as well. I thought I knew the grimoires pretty well. No false modesty, I thought I was like pretty good on grimoire knowledge. But as I was doing all the research, I realised how much I didn't know and how much it was like, it's the classic tip of the iceberg, how much more stuff there's out there. Example, the Abra-Melin, I knew there was the French manuscript that Mavers did, and then there's the German manuscript that George Den did, which is like the complete one. And then I discovered there's about another 15 Abra-Melin manuscripts, quite a few in Italy, and there's other German ones. And interestingly, a member of Fraternitas Saturni who Crowley knew had the 1725 publication of the Abra-Melin, of the complete text. So Crowley would have actually known that there was a complete one. He just was too lazy to do the 18-month Abra-Melin and did the incomplete 6-month French version that Mavers translated, which might contribute to the reason that he screwed it up. But that's just a speculation on my part. Doing those 100 and putting it all together gave a sort of panoramic view. It made sort of a different perspective of it. It's like we always think of the grimoires being, it's all about conjuration. But actually, when you look at them across the spectrum, conjuration is one of like 3 real threads in there. Because you've got conjuration, you've got divination. There's like 36 different techniques of divination spread amongst the grimoires. One of the appendixes obviously is on all of those. And you've got the simple charms and stuff. Because at the end of the day, conjuration is not something you do every day. All the preparation and purification and stuff that goes into conjuration, you've got to have a good reason, big reason for doing conjuration. You don't do it for a little something. So all those charms and spells and things are for dealing with your everyday stuff that needs to be sorted out. Because at the end of the day, magic, and that includes the grimoire magic, is not just about rituals, it's about how you engage with the world. And I think when you work with the grimoires, it teaches you that. It sort of emphasises the nature of the spirits that are around that we deal with, of their different natures. It's how you live your life. It's things that become part of your process, that are part of the respect that you have for the world around you and everything living and dead that you deal with. Because at the end of the day, any living tradition honours its dead. And so from that perspective, although you might think, there's nothing actually with the dead in the grimoires, again, when you start looking, there are bits and pieces. There's all sorts of stuff. You're looking and think, where did that come from? That came out of like left field. Suddenly there's bits that you didn't expect to be there. There's all different elements coming in, and there's such a, like I say, panoramic perspective within the grimoires that when you look at what is there, it's massive. So I attempted to codify it as much as possible by putting those 100 chapters. Each chapter is like a sort of précis, an overview of what's in that grimoire, a list of the spirits, the magical tools that are used, what manuscripts we know there are of it. So there's hundreds. I mean, in the manuscript bibliography runs to hundreds, but it's like where all the libraries and universities they're at as well, so you can find them. It's designed to be a reference tool for people, a research tool, as well as for people want to practice, as well as for each of those grimoires essential reading. Books that I recommend I think are really good about that. It's like, I'm interested in this book, I look at the chapter, okay, I should go away and also read this and this to follow up. To just try and always point people in a direction that's going to help them on their path. This book was really designed to be a service to the tradition at the end of the day. It was a labour of love, but it was just something that I had to do. Once I started, there wasn't really any choice. I couldn't stop writing it. Something else I'd started working on before just went on the back burner because, like I say, it just became completely overwhelming. And because I am about the practice as well as the scholarship, I had to throw in a chapter on practice in the book, which has a load of stuff, looking at the whole process of conjuration and the steps of it, and bits that I found helpful to add in. I'm not saying the way I list it is the only way, or necessarily the best way, but it's trying to offer ideas and things based on my experience of those 40 years or so of practice that people might find helpful for themselves. Like I say, the field is expanding so much. There is so much good work being done by so many different magicians and scholars and academics out there that it's really exciting, the grimoire field. And in my experience, there is also a much more positive community in the grimoire field, where if you're working on something, other people, if you're stuck with something or you need help finding something, other people are only too happy to help you. From that point of view, it's like, for example, when Stephen and I were working on Clavis Inferni, which is a swine of a manuscript, so many different magical manuscripts, so many stuff abbreviated, contracted and reversed in Latin and having to decipher the whole thing. It was going to be volume 3, I think, of Sorcerer's Ceremonial Magic, and it ended up being volume 5 because it took us a couple of years to get it all done. And even then, there was a couple of little bits we couldn't find. Contacted Joe Peterson, and he was able to work them out and let us know. That's that sort of spirit of fraternity that there is amongst practitioners of the grimoires, which is a really positive thing. And that's another reason why I wanted to write this book, is to give people those tools so that whichever one it is or wherever you're going with it, you can find hopefully a signpost in that book that will go, yeah, okay, I'll go over there. One of my personal favourite bits was the Materia Magica appendix, which is also huge. You want to know 50 different uses for, not 50, a dozen different uses for bat blood? Here you go, here's all the things for it. But again, by doing that, it was able to make connections that I didn't realise were there before. For example, there was one charm which is in Le Petit Albert, and I realised, because I was putting ingredients in, and what it's for, and it's like, hang on, this is in the Picatrix. And nobody that I'm aware of had made that connection with the Picatrix to Le Petit Albert, which meant that whoever was putting the charms in, one of those people had seen the Picatrix. So, this whole thing of tracing the threads between things, and you start to realise how interwoven it is. That's why one of the things in every chapter 4 that I've put is likely influences on the text, where we know things in it have been drawn from. Because again, it's that tracing and the development of the practices that are in them. At the end of the day, this is not the end, as I have to say. I chose 100 as a good pause point, but this is, from here, it's going to kind of be like a life's work thing. I do already have plans for, there are going to be supplements to it, and a volume 3. There's still a load of stuff that needs to go in. The first supplement is actually going to be text, so it's going to be some stuff in there that hasn't been translated before, but grouped together, that's all of the same kind, and things like this, because I want to keep trying to add to that in a way that doesn't detract from all the other fabulous books that are coming out. If someone else is writing on something, I don't need to. But with the view I have now from having done this, I can see where there's things that I think will be beneficial to be out there. And so my work is taking me kind of towards those things. What they are, I'm not going to say, because I've had too many ideas nicked in the past by people. Not that I'm dissing all you lovely people, but I have become more cautious about, sharing ideas for future projects, because it can happen. And I think we've been burnt before with
yes, indeed,
people taking our ideas and not producing them to the standard that we would have wanted. Let's put it that way. So yeah, this is it kind of marks a point for me. It's like, you know, the Grimoire Encyclopaedia coming out, it's like been part of the best year of my life. You know, got married, had a baby daughter, and the book came out. So it's like, it really has been like, you know, my best year. And so coming to London to sort of talk about it and talk a bit about the process that brought it there is like, you know, a delight for me. And I do appreciate people coming to hear me waffle on about it. So on that point, I think I will pause, if that's okay, and then leave it for questions. If anybody has any questions, or is everyone going to go silent as usual?
I would like to add that David has actually brought the whole Grimoire tradition together in one place. It's not now scattered amongst various academic stuff, various single Grimoire translations. People can now look at the whole field. He may have left 20 out, as he said, but those are not the important ones. There's 100 there, and that is the whole tradition in one place, thank God. I wouldn't have thought of anybody else better to do that than David.
Two quick questions. So one is, I was reading, I think it was J. Stratton Kent, and he was saying in this light-hearted way, well, you know, you could have a substitution if you couldn't find, you know, the parchment, perhaps going to cast off a piece of paper. One, so how do you feel about substitutions? And two, what's your all-time go-to grimoire if you're really in trouble?
Okay, so the first one, substitutions. Yes, in the chapter on practice, I talk about the idea of magical momentum and about the more that you put into the practice and things, the better your chance of success. And that when you work for a grimoire, I'm a great believer in having a degree of fluidity with it before you change stuff. But generally, that you don't take anything out, but adding stuff in can greatly add to the magical momentum. Because at the end of the day, the grimoires weren't written by somebody thinking, oh, I'm going to write a book that's for other people, you know, that they can, that's a go-to of everything to do. They're putting in the stuff that they want recorded. They might leave stuff out because it's things they take for granted and do. So from that perspective, I think substitutions, if done well, don't really detract from the magical momentum. So yes, I think substitutions can be fine, you know, depending on the thing and that you find a good substitute for it. My go-to grimoire, perhaps a bit cliched, but I'm going to have to say the Key of Solomon, because I have had so much, so it's like good things with. I love the pentacles of the Key of Solomon. You know, I have 2 of them tattooed on me, and I've had really good, repeatedly results with making pentacles from the key. You know, when COVID hit, I made like pentacles, health ones for like family and friends. I had one protection ones. People were one where they walked away that they kept in their car. I was telling someone about this earlier. They were in a car crash. Car was totaled. They walked away. Everyone in the other car died. So another time, there's another protection one. They were worried about potentially having break-ins because where they lived was quite isolated, and there was a burglar who happened to like trip and crack his head open on the fireplace, knock himself out. So they had to get the police in, and he was lying there bleeding on the floor when they got there. So, you know, repeatedly good results with the pentacles of the Key of Solomon. So I would say the Key of Solomon. For simpler stuff, I would say the Book of Gold, because I love the Psalms, the magic of the Psalms, and there's a lot of simple charms in there, which again have good results with. And I love sort of singing the Psalms in Latin. It's just a personal thing. I think they have such a beautiful cadence to them, and so for the simpler stuff, the Book of Gold is probably my go-to. But for like the bigger stuff, Key of Solomon, and of course, Steve and I did like the definitive Key of Solomon with the vertical Key of Solomon, where we tracked it. Again, example like you're talking about. That's about 150 manuscripts we found of the Key of Solomon. It's the most, of all of the grimoires, it's the one that there's the most copies of. It shows that the popularity of it is enduring, and at one point we were sat in the balcony with 20 manuscripts. They said, you can only take 10 manuscripts out. So the students said, can we take, well, there's 2 of us, so can we have 10 each? So we had them all laid out. And then doing the more mundane work side of it. But, we were sat there, you've got 20 Kirsholm manuscripts, going through one by one with an Excel spreadsheet, making out what each chapter is and stuff. And, there's that side of things as well, which is very mundane and down to earth when you're doing research. It's not all eureka moments. The eureka moments are wonderful, but there is a lot of hard grind work when you do research on things that goes into, like, the writing side of it. It's Kirsholm.
Not to mention actually reading the handwriting.
Yes. Yeah. Some of those magicians had awful handwriting, worse than doctors.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing about your work today, but also for your life's work. I think we're so blessed to have such a wealth of grimoires available to us, and that goes to both of you. I have another Jake's Rankine question, which is, Jake seemed to believe there's under all the Goetic materials in particular some sort of ur-text or ur-practice, which is now washed down through all the Christian content and so forth. I was wondering, do you believe in any one moment where there was that was where this was practiced, and we our own piecing together the old stuff? And if so, which of the grimoires, which text that you work with, would you say is the closest to an original practice from whatever point in history?
I think that we can see the influence of things from the past in grimoire tradition, but I don't think there's going back to ancient Greece, there's no text of stuff that we could identify and say, oh yeah, this whole sequence is what we find in the grimoires. I mean, there's things in ancient Egyptian magic where you can identify those practices in the grimoires, for example, and then going into the Greek stuff, very much so, PGM, Supplementum Magicum, works like that. So I don't think there's one that's exclusive, anything that is an text. I think there's practices which come together in the grimoires, but not a text. With regard to what's the closest back to that, I think in some respects the Hygromantia. I mean, the Hygromantia is interesting because although the grimoires are essentially within a Christian cosmology, or let's say Abrahamic, because you've got Islamic and Judaic as well. But the Hygromantia does have, you have sort of your Christian god, but then you have 7 planetary gods from the Greek myths, and then you've got your angels and demons of the hours, so 168, one for every hour, of the days of the week. And there's stuff in the Hygromantia which you can see going straight back to the PGM. So of them, in a sense, that's the most pagan, I would say, of the grimoires, the Hygromantia, and the one that feels the most like that.
The most complete in many ways.
Yeah. And the Hygromantia ones are really interesting. I mean, Hygromantia is actually one where I've tried out the stuff from. I mean, there's all these grimoires, but Hygromantia is one I have worked from and done a conjuration of one of the demons of the hours. This is actually one of those sort of slightly funny and slightly embarrassing stories we could tell. And so we substitute Hecate in as the goddess for the Luna, so we're doing it on a Monday. So rather than using Selene, we used Hecate. Or I did, because I did all the conjuration stuff. And I grandstanded. I had a bit of an ego moment. So last time I grandstanded in the Grimoire, even though it went really well. But afterwards I thought, that was a bit stupid, David. You were being a bit arrogant with that. Because I did the conjuration without a triangle or anything. And just there in the fire. And the demon appeared in the flames. We had a human... The flames took a sort of humanoid form. And I had all these people who've never been at a Grimoire ritual before freaking the shit out. Suddenly there's this flames humanoid form. I'm going, it's fine. We did sort of call Hecate, and we called on the constraining angel, and then we got the demon, and it's all cool, don't worry guys. And asked some questions, they gave answers, and then went away. But at the time I thought, that was really stupid of me. That was actually quite irresponsible to do that. but it worked really well. So just from a point of view of hygromantia stuff working, it worked a charm. I mean, flipping hell, it was fabulous. It was like a special effects thing, it's like it's what you hope for, when you do conjuration, to get that level of something being visibly there.
And everybody who saw it stopped thinking at all that it's all in the head.
Yes.
No, it's external.
How do you count the hours? Because in the northern latitudes, the days are longer during the spring to summertime, and then during the winter the hours are shorter. Or do you actually count 12 hours regardless?
It depends on the grimoire. Some of them are doing the planetary hours, where where you divide the hours of light and darkness by 12. But in the hygromantia, it's just straight 1 hour slots
From
midnight to midnight. Yeah. I think it's midnight to midnight, isn't it? Hygromantia, if I remember correctly.
Sunrise.
Is it sunrise? Or sunrise to sunrise?
Okay.
But anyway,
I can't remember.
those are the two different traditions.
Yeah, there's somewhere. It depends on which grimoire. It can either just be straight 24 equal hours, or the planetary, where it's you might have hours that are 47 minutes long, or an hour and 20, depending on how many hours of light and dark there are.
Probably more common than using clock time.
Yeah.
Clock times are later. That's
I've got a question. Did you exclude any grimoires that you came across? And so, what was your sort of criteria for what was it that they didn't actually include?
I didn't exclude. There's a couple of the Arab ones that there's no good English translation of yet. That's why they didn't go in. At the time I had finished, a partial translation of Shams al-Marif had been published, but I don't want to work off a partial translation. There was another one that's sort of a grimoire that's somebody was doing a PhD on, that's not available again in English, it's quite an obscure text that I really wanted to put in, and I contacted her and she said yes, I'll send you a copy of my work, and then a couple of days later said, sorry, actually I'm going to get it published, so I'm not sending it. So I was like, okay. So knowing how academia works, by the time I get round to volume 3, maybe she'll have had it published. So, I mean, and there were some texts that I was thinking I'd like to include them in the next one, but they're not specifically grimoires, but they kind of have an influence in tradition, so they can, for the 100, I basically went for all of the ones that people know, a few that people don't know that I just thought were really interesting, so they've got to go in there. And, like I say, the important text. I mean, like the first of the 100 chapters is the Bible, because, the Bible is a pretty big part of the grimoire tradition, but people don't really tend to talk about it. So it's like, right, that's going in. And it's number 1 because it's done chronologically. And there is a lot of interesting material in the Bible. So that's where your holy oil, if a grimoire does not have a specific recipe for holy oil, the holy oil you're using is the one that's made, they give you the recipe for in Exodus, for example. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff in. So I went through, and it's surprising, even with the political cutting and pasting and stuff that got done on the Bible, particularly the King James sort of cut on it and things, how many gods and goddesses are still in there? The spirit list of the Bible is more than you think. So yeah, so I tried to go with all. There's a few things, like I say, that I thought I would like to include, but they weren't hugely there. And there's some that I'd always felt should be there, but I didn't. It's like I argued back in 2005 that I thought there was an influence from the Macabre tradition into the grimoires. Macabre is like a sort of Jewish mystical tradition. Macabre means chariot. It's this idea of you go through this process of purification and prayer, and you have these 7 sets of amulets, and you go through the 7 heavens to get into the presence of God. And the description of it is these 4 rabbis do this. One dies, one goes mad, one gets beaten up and thrown out by the angels, one makes it. So 25% success rate for for that one. And the Macabre texts are really interesting, and they sort of from about the 6th century running through. And as I was doing the work, I was finding, I thought the macabre tradition kind of died out by about the 10th century, and I discovered it's actually still going on in the Renaissance, which was interesting. But B, one of the most important texts that will again transform the grimoire field is Summa Sacra Magicae, which is this 800-page thing from 1346. It's the first occurrence of the Swan Book of Honorius, and it's this various magical texts all interwoven into a practical book by this Catalan scholar Ganellas. There's no translation. Well, it was translated by an academic, but she won't publish it. So there are people working on translation. There's a group of people who are working amongst us on it.
It's been translated partially into Russian.
Yeah, so
that's with limited use
to most of us. But what did I go on to Summa Sacra Magicae? Oh yes, in Summa Sacra Magicae, there's bits from macabre texts in there. So I was like, I was right all those years ago. I was right. There's a really interesting thing there, for example, which I really like. The items of clothing that the magician wears, the 7 items, like the cloak and the robe and the shoes and things, they all have these divine names engraved onto them, which are from Shiokoma, which is the body of God, which is this heretical macabre text about the measurement of the body of God, and there's all these divine names to draw the different parts of God's body, and these divine names are put onto them. So you can see that when the magician's wearing these clothes with the divine names, they're literally enfolding themselves in the body of God with all these divine names of God on the clothing that they wear. So it's having that divine authority for dealing with the spirits. And it's just all these realizations as I was working through. It was suddenly having these flashes that I hadn't clicked before, about things in the grimoires. When it's panoramic, instead of having lots of fragments, suddenly the jigsaw's coming together more, and you're seeing. And I think we've reached a point now where the jigsaw's kind of complete, but we're realizing that there's all these other pieces to add on to the outside of the jigsaw to make a bigger picture. We do have a picture. Now it's just the process of expanding that picture to make it even bigger. But there's so much come together that it's a viable living tradition, the grimoires. And part of the beauty of that is that it's a living tradition that's been going on for a good 800 years. And so now the material is there for people to actually carry it on as a tradition. And in the last 20 years particularly, I was talking about how magic's changed. There's a lot more folk magic. People have moved a lot more to spirit work than you go back to the 80s, and there was not much focus on working with spirits or with the dead at all. That has really shifted in the last 20 years. There's a lot more people interested in working with spirits, working with their ancestors and the dead and honouring them. So I think that kind of has meshed with the explosion of the grimoires. So I'm going off on a bit of a sermon there, aren't I? Seth.
Have you found or identified any sort of clusters of grimoires that, to use it, that synergize together, that could be using, say, 3 or 4 grimoires at the same time that work very well with the same spirits, which is that would all form their own little bubble from time to place, or just by happens.
I think there are clusters of grimoires, and that's something that may come in subsequent supplements, so I'm not actually going to further answer that question.
First of all, thank you very much for something that you did many years ago. I was at one of your rituals before. I think the very first LBRP I ever saw was you performing. And I was standing in the circle where the energy kind of went through, and that was quite a life-changing moment. Because no one had talked to me about LBRP before. And, I've been awakened, I didn't know anything about it. So finally, I get to say thank you for that experience, and I'm going to explore it.
Okay.
The second thing is, you were talking about grimoires and woodcuttery. Now, I'm completely new to grimoires, know nothing about it. So I'm just wondering, how do you feel about woodcutting and grimoires, and do you think about woodcutters just really this light thinking that?
Well, David wrote a book on.
This is a genuine question, because I'm just wondering whether it's so watered down.
Okay.
Is there anything in it?
I did this book, Wicca Magical Beginnings, where I showed all of the practices in Wicca, and it's interesting where everything comes from. Funnily enough, my next book is actually called Wicca Grimoire Roots, and I'm actually going a step further because I found there's another manuscript of one of the grimoires that Gerald Gardner had, and some of the material in there looks kind of like it could have influenced Wicca. So I think this needs to come out and be out there and throw the Wiccans off balance a bit, particularly the Americans. And if you look at Wicca, clearly Wicca was a continuation of grimoire practice. The initial Wicca is basically at its core. It's like mainly like Solomonic stuff and from a couple of the other grimoires, with this liturgical overlay of taken from bits of Crowley and Leyland Zaraja and other things on top. But the core of it is grimoire. It's a sort of simplified form, but that was happening throughout the tradition. So I don't think simple is bad. I think simple is good in magic. We tend to overcomplicate things. I mean, if you look at the early stuff, you look at Sworn Book of Honorius and how complex that is, and then you look at Grimorium Verum, and it's like, it's completely simplified down. It's been pared down to the essentials, as it were, and magic also working with demons rather than angels, so slightly different kettle of fish. Spirits, let's say. We should say brazen vessel of spirits if we're going to make a grimoire pun. For me, the problem with Wicca, and I'm speaking to somebody who has been a Wiccan high priest for decades as well, is the way that it got changed by people who didn't have a very good grasp of how magic works. Not to beat around the bush. There's been lots of add-ons and things, and the theology has not been consistently done. That's one of the biggest problems I see with Wicca, because at its heart, I think Wicca is this beautiful elegance to it, and but the thing is, at the end of the day, the Book of Shadows is a skeleton, and it's so the muscles and things that you add on to it, and how that becomes expanded, influencing. When I have run covens, when I've done them, they've always had a very heavy ritual magic input. And I've done conjurations with my covens. They've experienced what it is to have a conjuration of Olympic spirits and things like this. It's really Wicca. The problem is, it has become watered down, and all this stuff been put on. It's been people now. Oh, it's this lovely goddess nature religion. That's not what Wicca was. Wicca was a ritual magic system, but what it is now and what it was are two different things. And it does not have, for me, a consistent theology. I mean, going aside, this is something I was actually talking to somebody about yesterday. There's another Wiccan high priest. For example, take the Wheel of the Year. We know that Gerald Gardner and Ross Nichols came up with the idea of the Wheel of the Year downstairs in Atlantis, and I've got these 4 Sabbats, or I've got these solstices and equinoxes. Hey, let's put them together. Oh, there's 8. Wheel of the Year, great. And the Wheel of the Year came into being, and it works. But then you have to look at how it works. For example, if you go, rather than doing this whole contorted thing of what happens to the god in the Wheel of the Year, he's going down to the underworld, he's born, he's doing this, he's doing that. If you actually split it and go, okay, well, hang on, let's go back to those 2 sets of 4. You've got solstices and equinoxes. That's the sun god. You've got the other 4. That's the earth god. If you go, hang on, there's 2 different things, and you work them as 2 sort of interwoven things, then suddenly that part of Wicca makes more sense, for example. But people don't question. And it's not just Wicca, it's any tradition. You've got to go in and you've got to start challenging why is it like this? That's why I wrote Wicca Magical Beginnings, because it was like, there's stuff here that just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm going to deep dive in. I'm going to do all this research, and I wrote Wicca Magical Beginnings because there were things to me that were unanswered about it. And I was not interested in the people. I was interested in the practices. So I don't care if Gerald Gardner spoke to this person or that person. That does not, to me, prove whether Wicca works or where the material comes from. So I think, yes, Wicca, at its heart, I think is lovely and works really well. And for me, it's a good way to get into group practice as well. And that's nothing about the grimoires. The grimoire tradition, by and large, is a group tradition. It's not a solitary thing. It works better, preferably with 2 or 3 people. You know, if you're doing conjuration, it's one person to conjure, one person to be the seer, scryer, and if you've got a third one, they can be the scribe. It works really well. To have to do all the conjuration, then go and do the seer bit, then remember what's said and write it down, it's horrible. That's what, you know, having that small working group, and of course grimoires were done. It was until, you know, the modern day. Obviously, it's more convenient to do it in your nice, warm, central, easy place. But the grimoires were practiced outdoors. You know, they talk about you go away from people, out into the wilds where your neighbours aren't going to report you to the church for like burning incense and you know saying all these strange words that they can hear.